Anytime someone starts banging the drum of we need to release things faster, what developers hear is crunch. We're going to crunch hard. Why does improving release cadence not mean we're going to crunch our developers to get them to do twice as much work in half the time?
Again, it doesn't mean that the work gets done faster. It just means that when you do release, you have a higher likelihood of success. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Just by virtue of, putting small pieces out constantly, you're going to get you're much more likely to have success than you are if you try and put everything out at once, because you're much more likely to miss something.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Ocel, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, here for another episode of the Leadership Exchange. Today, I'm here with Josh Tenenbaum. Josh is the VP of Engineering at First Advantage. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing really well. We're recording this just after the holidays, so you're getting our most rested selves, but we're also getting a little bit up to speed. How many emails did you come back to this morning?
Well over 1,000.
Okay. Well, good luck. Maybe you'll be done in time for next holidays. But thanks for being here today. The topic that we're going to be discussing is actually release velocity, right? How to get our products updated and released more quickly and do it in a way that actually can be sustained. So I guess my first question for you, Josh, is this why is this a topic that you're passionate about?
I would say it's for historical reasons. I tried it the other way, and it was very painful. So when we had larger releases, they were more prone to failure, and especially when it was when something released and it didn't work, it just became larger and larger of an issue, and it snowballed. Versus if we did multiple releases and something didn't work, it was much easier to roll it back, pull it out, and move on with something else. And so by virtue of just doing small releases very, very often, we had a much higher success rate.
And just to kind of anchor the conversation, with the kind of teams that you've worked with, what is the release cadence as far as updating software that you're aiming for? How big are those releases, and how big are the teams that you're operating in? Help us get a sense of the scope that you've been operating in.
Sure. So I have 4 different leaders. And I have one who primarily handles our legacy platform, another one who handles our APIs, and a third one who handles kind of our core services that are shared throughout the company. And then a fourth leader who handles DevOps as well as DBAs. And the primary platform that I think that we want to focus on today is our legacy platform. It's 20 years old. It was on-prem, and we had to do a pretty big effort to move it to the cloud. And what we found was that we were moving away from a pets to cattle. We were moving to cattle versus pets. And when we did that, things became much easier. So we had, when we had to care and feed for each machine, it just became harder and harder to maintain. When we did it this way, we could go and stand up a new release. We could test it before it was even live. And then if there was a problem, nobody knew better. We could, if there wasn't a problem, we could move over to it. And if we found a problem after we released, we could roll back within a few minutes. We could then scale down the old instances for cost reasons. And if we found a problem later on, we could scale those up and be moved back in 20 minutes. And so those types of activities just made a huge difference. And in terms of a cadence, what I really am shooting for is I want to release twice a day, because I want people to get those releases or get those changes out as fast as possible. And there are a couple reasons for that. So number one, developers really, really, really like it when you get things out fast, and they appreciate it, and they become more invested in the end result. And the second reason that is critical is you lose a lot of the pain and the things that you just don't need when you push people to move quickly. And that's not, I'm moving quickly so I'm going to go and trip and fall. It's I'm moving quickly so that I have this process down. And when you do something a lot, so if I'm releasing once a quarter, it's not, the process is, it's not built in. It's like you get up and you go to get a drink of water. You know all that steps. You go you get the glass, you get the water, you fill it up, you drink it. I want my releases to be similar to that. I want people to practice the art of releasing as much as it is going and getting a drink of water. And that way, it's not some taboo. It's not somebody. I mean, I remember going back when one of the things that we do is we don't patch our database servers. We replace them. So we have a high availability cluster, and we take a new fully patched node, we bring it in, and we fail over to it, and then we take the third node out. Again, cost reasons. So the first time we did it, everybody's on pins and needles because nobody knows if it works. But if you do it all the time, very often, you become very comfortable with it. And so just by virtue of doing that, especially with our releases, everybody's comfortable with, all right, we're going to release. And all of these things that you thought were important, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But you figure out how to do them quickly and fast and without pain.
Give me a sense of what the metrics are that you're tracking as far as getting a baseline. So if you were joining a new team from scratch, you don't know anything about the organization, and they don't have any sense of how quickly they could release or how fast they are as an organization, like what are some of the things that you're going to be starting to track, or maybe you would hope they were already tracking, that would help you get a sense of kind of where they are and how to start pushing progress?
Yeah, that I would start, I mean, all the other stuff aside, I would start with number one, I'd be looking at the number of issues. I'd be looking at the number of pull requests. How quickly is a pull request approved? And then I'd be looking at the number of releases. And the reason I did it in that order, as opposed to looking at the number of releases first, is because I'd want to understand the cadence of development itself. And then I'd want to understand how they're getting packaged. I mean, obviously, the number of releases is important, but first you have to understand how people are developing. And I guess the next thing I'd want to understand is, what is the release process? And then kind of dissect it into smaller pieces, functionally decompose it, so that I understand why each part of it is being done. So for our releases, as an example, we release to a QA environment, we test it. And then when we release to production, we've kind of broken it out into 4 steps. So step number 1 is we're going to create an environment. So that goes in, and that's going to create the releases. It's going to stand up a single instance, and then we're going to run our testing on it. Step 2 is we're going to scale up our instances. So we're going to scale up to production level so that when we do shift traffic over, it's going to be there, and it's going to be transparent to our users. Step 3 is we're going to transfer people over, and that is going to be either immediate, or we're going to shift traffic over gradually. So we have to determine which one we want. It depends on, if there's a breaking change between the releases where the old version and the new version would cause collisions, we would do it on a hard shift, versus we want to do it softly so that people don't see the difference. And then kind of the fourth is going to be scaling down our old version. And we want to scale that down to 0. And again, for cost reasons, we can always scale it up. And it took us a few years to kind of get to that 4-step process. We started off kind of it was more of a 2-step process. It was create the environment and then release or, shift traffic over. But by breaking it out into smaller pieces, it really made a huge difference.
I'm curious if you agree with this statement, but it's like if I like to run sometimes. And so it's like if I go run a mile or whatever distance, 10K, I understand what 10 kilometers is. I know what that fixed distance is, and I can see my time, and I can try to do something that will make it a little bit faster, and it either works or it doesn't work, and it's very straightforward. But like in software and in product development, I feel like sometimes it's not obvious what you just ran. Did I just run a mile? Did I just run a 10K? Did I just run a marathon? It's sometimes difficult to quantify how much is in each release if you don't have a mature enough team that like releases are somewhat similar, or you have a good understanding of the amount of work or effort something is taking. So, how do you even get to that place to understand how quickly you're going relative to what you just tackled?
don't know that I could really. I'm having a hard time with the analogy because I don't think it's not a race. You're, it's a continual run. Every day you're getting up, you're hunting, you're gathering.
Okay.
Better than more than or it's a series of races. And I would say that while personally I would not be a sprinter, if I were to make the analogy, I think it would be, each one is going to be a race, and I would prefer to each one to be a sprint. So I would prefer it to be a 50-yard dash as opposed to a 10K. That way, I'm getting smaller bits done. And so, for us, and again, this is going to sound funny, but going back to our first release, my boss's suggestion was, yes, your first release is important, but your second release is more important. Can you reproduce it? It's not. I remember listening to an interview with the Farley brothers, I think, and they said they had no idea what they were doing, and they brought these, and they basically talked to the cast and the crew, and they said, "Look, we don't have any idea what we're doing," and the crew helped them out immensely. But one of the things that they said was, or one of their mentors said to them was, "Yeah, worry about the second take, not necessarily just the first take." Like, yeah. So our first release in the cloud went swimmingly, and then the 5 others we did that week also went well. And that was my concern: was, are we going to be able to do this sustainably, and not just are we going to be able to do this once? Because what ended up happening is we found a bug, and then we found another bug, and we found another bug. And we kept having these little bugs that we found. They weren't showstoppers. It wasn't enough for us to roll back to being on-prem, but it was enough to where we needed to fix it. And so that was the thing that made me the happiest was, all right, not only did we release once the first week, we released 5 times. In fact, we released 3 times in one day the first week, which was not what I wanted, but it worked really well.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I think the thing I was stuck on is, and I think this is maybe why you were suggesting don't start at the releases, is I think a lot of leaders, they start there. They go, guys, we're only releasing 12 times a year, or we're only releasing 4 times a year, and we need to double that. We need to triple it. I just heard a podcast where a guy said he's doing it every day or twice a day, right? We need to do that. And it's not always clear what those releases aren't the same, right? Like, if I'm releasing twice a year, that's a lot of huge features that are going into there probably, and a ton of little bug fixes. You can't just do that twice as fast. You have to do smaller things twice as fast, as I assume is kind of that idea. And I think maybe that was where I was getting hung up on, is like people that fixate too much on the release count without thinking, well, how much effort was in that release? Because it might be that one of the things to go faster is we have to do less in a release as opposed to just do the same release faster.
Yes and yes. So I think I should back up and talk a little bit more about kind of the environment overall. So what we did was we started in development. So we have ephemeral development environments that you can stand up, and you go into our automation tool, which we use Jenkins, and that's not important, but you go into Jenkins, you click and you say, all right, I want to create a dev environment. You give it a name, you give it a duration. So it's, you can create it for up to a week, and then you go and it's all automated. But we use that same process when you're creating the environment in our QA environment, when you're creating it in a production environment. And so it's not as much you're doing the same thing. It's I'm building the structure around it so that I can automate all of this release. And it's not something that you can do overnight. I mean, it took us a month, 2 months, 3 months to get to, all right, are we comfortable with our development environment? Yes. All right. Are we comfortable with our QA environment? Yes. And so now you're 4 months in, and it's a small team because, you can't pile the bodies on and get this done. Your mythical man month comes into play here. So I had a very small team. I had one developer who was just super insightful, and I basically pulled him off and said, you're going to work on this. We're going to meet daily. You're going to, give me updates. And so I would talk to him for 5 minutes, and he would give me an update, and he would just go. And then, same thing with our database. Again, very small team, about 3 to 5 people. And we were super successful because we were very focused. I could keep them out of the other kind of mess that it was. And just by virtue of having that automation, and as I said, so you're not having to hike down to the well, fill up the jug, bring it back to the house. You go to the faucet, you fill up the water. That's the automation. We built a water system, so to speak.
I like that. The other analogy that jumped to my mind that I like is this idea that this is kind of like if you I've been to New York City, and sometimes you walk by when it's the day before, the day of trash day, right? And there's just trash piled up on the streets. The trash piles up at the same rate it maybe ever piles up. Trash just accumulates at a certain rate for the amount of people in a city. But what you can control, I guess, and what we're talking about controlling is the amount of times you run the trucks. How often does a truck show up to grab the trash? Because if the trash builds up too much between runs of the truck, there's a lot of negative effects and issues that amount for that. Of course, in this case, if you can run the trucks every day, that's great, right? Super clean, everything, as soon as it goes out, it gets picked up. So is that maybe a good analogy too for what we're kind of disentangling velocity from release cadence?
Yes, it's a perfect analogy, minus the fact that it's trash, but yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's exactly right. What we're putting out there is a lot better. But if it piles up, though, sometimes it has some of the same negative effects.
Fingers crossed,
a lot of unreleased code piled up can sometimes have a lot of negative downstream effects.
Correct.
All right. Well, listen, we still have more of our conversation, but I just wanted to take a moment here to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs. This.Labs are the experts in modern web development and consulting. If you're looking to scale up your development teams efficiently, or if you need assistance in turning your innovative ideas into reality with robust proofs of concept, This.Labs has you covered. This.Labs doesn't just help you build software, they build partnerships. They collaborate closely with your team to understand your unique challenges and craft tailored solutions that drive real results. You can join the many companies that have accelerated their growth and innovation with the help of This.Labs. Just visit this.co to discover how they can help you take your projects to the next level. Thanks to This. And of course my team for sponsoring this episode and allowing me to have these great conversations and supporting the community. All right, now back to our episode. So, Josh, I want to kind of pivot to talk about how to improve velocity, right? Like, let's start talking about wherever anybody is, right? Because we're always on a journey of improvement. How should a team work to improve their velocity? Like, should they just go out, research what the best companies are doing and just start doing that tomorrow? Like, it's New Year's here now. So everyone is doing their 7 days a week at the gym right now and about to burn themselves out in a month. So like, what is the way to do this in a sustainable way that still gets the results people want?
I'm going to say that while that's a possibility and a lot of companies have done this well, I don't know that worked for me. And I'll say, it's not like I'm not going to go and say, oh, someone has a solution, I'm not going to use it. There are a lot of companies that have really good solutions for this, but what we found was that what we were doing wasn't very hard from a technological sense. It was much more, how do we automate what we're already doing? And so to me, that was the most important thing, was breaking things down, understanding each component, and automating it. And so, I will say this, when we talk to Amazon, a lot of what they offer is not really focused on this solution of automation. So they have a number of products where they make it easy to do something, but they don't make it easy to make it as a repeatable process. And I'm not trying to slight Amazon here. I mean, the services they offer, fantastic. Same with Azure, but the focus really on automating this process has to be something that and again, my opinion, you have to take what your process is, you have to break it down, and you have to figure out how to automate each of those steps, or whether you even need to do those steps. And that really is important. So 99% of what we do, we can automate. There are still some things that we don't automate, that we do manually, and we just don't do those very often. So we have an internal service that gets used a little bit, and I don't think it's even worth spending the time on it. So we released it once in 5 years. So, and I think we released it maybe 2 more times in the last 2 years. So I'm just not even going to bother with that because it's not that important. But everything that is important, I'm gonna focus on how do we make it go faster? How do we do it more often? And we do that more often with automation. And so we're going to take something, and we're going to say, all right, well, I need to create this service. All right. We're not going to go into the UI and create that service. We're going to automate that. We're going to use CDK, CFT, any of those solutions.
Interesting. I do think that we're talking a lot about tech there, but I feel too that as far as speed tends to be, at least in my impression, at least speed of releases, tends to be one of these things that, like, when you start doing things quickly, you start building the habits that lead to faster releases, that becomes like a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy once you've gotten it rolling, right? That because those things kind of feed into each other. Once I can do this a little bit faster, now I'm motivated to get that done a little bit faster, and it's a mindset shift. I think the opposite is also true, and I think teams will often find that they sometimes backslide when presented with quality issues, because when there's quality issues start going out, then people start saying, I need to put in more hard approval gates, and I need to see things before they go out, and things drag, and it becomes difficult to fight back because the releases get bigger, they're higher risk, so then even more approval gates get added, and slowness begets slowness in this regard. So how do people, how do you lead conversations that force teams and organizations to kind of fight back against what is normal human nature to say, no, we've been releasing poor quality, so we need to slow down and we need to make sure everything is perfect as it goes out? Like, how do you get people to give up that control?
That's a great question, Rob. And we did experience that. And we slowed down for a time. And our solution wasn't, all right, we're going to slow down and we're going to add more toll gates. It was, how do we fix our quality problem? And so by focusing on the problem itself, what we came up with and what we did was we improved our automation testing. And we had a team that focused on a regression pack, on functional testing. So as the engineers bring their code in, part of their task is they need to automate the testing around that and show that it was tested. And we don't have a QA team per se. So the QA team's job is not to write tests and to verify that things are working. It's to verify that the developer wrote the right tests and to give them suggestions on how to improve that. In addition, we also focused on our QA team writing tests for our top customers. So they focused on anything custom that was written for these guys, that worked for these guys. They would come in and they would write tests specifically to make sure that they were still working correctly. I know that's kind of it's not very egalitarian, but business sense, it was really important. And so by virtue of not only writing our automation, but improving our testing, that really allowed us to improve our cadence. And you couldn't get one without the other.
Yeah, I've spoken to Charity Majors about this as well. She's really big at pushing sort of release cadence. And one of the things which I think is a mentality shift, I'll be honest, I struggle with a lot, is this idea from going from seeing everything before it goes out to experiencing it somewhat with your customers, to testing in production, a lot of these people would kind of say, and not using that as a pejorative, like to say this idea that, yes, you want to have quality gates and automated quality gates along the way, but when your business leaders or your product leaders need to assess the state of the product and what it's doing, what better place to do that than in production with the version that your users are actually seeing rather than a beta or alpha version that your users are not experiencing? Like, is that a mentality that you have on your team, or where do product and business leaders plug themselves in as they kind of maybe want to lot sample or just, get a feel for like how things are progressing?
There's a lot. That was a lot.
Okay. Where do you want to jump in at?
A couple of points. For sales, we have a demo environment which we keep updated as well, and for product and for leadership, yes, we do production. The only thing I would kind of walk back from would be we don't test in production, and I say that only because I think that has negative, negative. I think people perceive that negatively. We definitely test in production in the sense that before something goes live, we will stage it in production and test it there. But typically, we do that before we go live. So, testing in production in that sense is we're not putting our customers in the way, or we're not having them test our product. And I think that's something that I want to just be careful on, and we will set up feature flags, so we can enable things into production for test accounts and do things of that nature, as well as pilots for certain customers that want to have something, and understand that we are creating a feature for them, but we tend to be very clear with them that this is the case, as opposed to throwing it out there and saying, "Oh, we'll figure it out when somebody complains." That's not a well.
I think that's a good point. And I think what they would answer, because I do agree, it's a bit of a provocative turn of a phrase just to get people's attention. But I think what the idea is behind it, if you can release every day or even multiple times a day, any given bug that you're going to discover is going to be easily discoverable and fixable in production, no deal. Now, obviously, however that bug got through, you want to find a way to patch the process that resulted in that bug if it's patchable, right? Add additional testing, figure out where your blind spot was, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. But this idea that if you can only release once a month, any bug that gets to production is going to be there for a month. That could really be painful, right? But the idea that so you're going to want all your business leaders and your product people to be in that beta thing, given all the feedback that they can, because we can't be off on the wrong direction for a month or 2 months or 3 months with a bad version out there. But if you can start releasing every day, it really is the case that your pre-production or your beta environments and your live environments are really not that distant from one another in some sense. And there's even though it feels like you're giving up control, anything you find is also more easily fixable. Like that I think that helps maybe give up some of that fear that leaders have when they want to start giving into the automation that, yes, you're going to be seeing things in production, but you're going to be able to get answers to your issues a lot faster as well.
Oh, agreed, 100%. And it reminds me of this early on. We were releasing and people were very squeamish and they're like, "Well, we found a bug." I'm like, "Okay, is the bug already there?" "Yes." And I said, "All right, so let's just go ahead and release because it's not making it worse, and then we'll get it on the next release." So very much agreed that by releasing often you remove the pain of a lot of these small bugs.
We've talked about this a little bit already, but I kind of wanted to address it again because I think a lot of people are concerned, maybe not leaders, although many leaders probably are, but certainly developers that I've spoken to are concerned. Anytime someone starts banging the drum of we need to release things faster, what developers hear is crunch. We're going to crunch hard. I think we've already addressed this a couple times, but I wondered if you could just package up something specifically about why does improving release cadence not mean we're going to crunch our developers to get them to do twice as much work in half the time?
Again, it doesn't mean that the work gets done faster. It just means that when you do release, you have a higher likelihood of success. Because if you're trying to, I think the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of, putting small pieces out constantly, you're going to get you're much more likely to have success than you are if you try and put everything out at once, because you're much more likely to miss something. And so, when I'm trying to come up with an example. There are so many times in the past where business said, "Hey, we really, really need this," and crunch time doesn't help. It's not like, "Oh, I need you to do 10x work in 5x time." doesn't matter. It's not gonna happen, and it's not gonna happen well. I think what is the old adage? You can get it good, you can get it fast, or you can get it cheap.
Cheap, yeah.
Pick two. And so the amount of work that people do it doesn't make things go faster. And so we still have the work, and people still have to spend the time. And when we crunch and try and get things done quicker, we end up tripping, and things don't go well, because that means that you kind of slide on doing the adequate testing, and you slide on doing the good code review and figuring things out. And I know we're close to time, but I will kind of drop the one bomb is, we really did focus a lot on code reviews, and that was critical. And so, not answering your question, but code reviews were so amazing in terms of getting the quality up by creating a kind of a standing session that we did daily, so that we had senior people coming in and looking at things and giving really, really good advice to people, and not making it a kind of a derogatory. It was more of a, hey, these are the things that you need to think about. It also created better standards for people. It also created more camaraderie, and it gave people who were coming into the team a good sense of what was the larger picture and what was going on.
I think that's really key. And that's why a lot of times when I've talked to my team, I've stopped saying the words faster and started saying the words efficient, more efficiently. Because I think developers that are working on teams that are releasing more frequently and more efficiently are happier.
Oh, yes.
They're not actually working that fast. It's that they just don't have all of these manual or annoying or wasteful steps that so many of the rest of our teams are struggling with. And so in that sense, it actually improves that developer happiness. And I think that's the kind of, maybe it's not counterintuitive, but I've had the same conversation with process, where people are like, I don't want more process. It's just so annoying. What a waste of time. But it's like, no, like when you have a well-formed process, the amount of comfort, the amount of focus you can put onto your work, as opposed to trying to stop everything from falling through the cracks, you're a happier developer, you're a happier worker, you're a happier team. And I think in the same way, releasing more efficiently and more frequently is that, as opposed to just working faster.
2 points. Number one is, from a developer perspective, they're seeing their work out there. They understand, oh, I made this change and it did this, and they can see the impact really, really quickly. And 1A of that is, if something didn't go right, you see it really, really quickly, and you can course correct. You can't do that if you're 3 months down the road. And kind of the second point is, going back to satisfaction from a development engineering type of approach, you can get data back to the people that are doing the work, and to them, it is it's great. I'm working on this, but and I'm getting paid, but now I'm getting paid, and I'm seeing that I'm making a huge difference, and that is a tremendous feeling of accomplishment to people, to actually understand the impact that they're making.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because for us, I mean, you raised the example of code reviews. For us, one of the teams that I'm working on right now, one of the things that helped us dramatically was actually much earlier in the process, and it was designs. We found out that developers were kind of getting guidances or, ideas on things that they needed to fix, and they just wanted to get hands on keyboard right away. And what ended up happening wasn't that, I want to just slow you down and make you fill out a bunch of paperwork for no reason. It was that those same conversations that would happen up front in a design review were happening at code review time, causing a bunch of annoyance and rework that nobody was happy about. Like, everybody loathed putting their code in because they knew it was going to lead to a bunch of questions about, why did you do it this way? Why didn't you count for this case? And so our team actually taking more time earlier in the process dramatically made code reviews better and less painful, and also the whole thing moved more smoothly because there was less rework. And again, I think that's one of those times, I hate using the word go slow to go fast, because I think we've sort of maybe confused a little bit in this conversation, but that's one of those instances where sometimes adding something can actually make the whole thing move faster. as opposed to, just trying to slim everything down.
True. And funny anecdote. I was approached by a person who said, yeah, I've had a bunch of people reach out to me and ask me questions about my service and how it works, because they're afraid when they come to code review that you're going to ask them questions, and they want to make sure they understand it. So I'd rather people wanted to figure out the design ahead of time, but my secondary is I'll take that they're afraid when they come to code review if they're not prepared.
Yeah.
So one way or the other, yes, they're going to spend the time doing the design. You're right. And I'd rather it be in code review before it gets to production, or in our QA testing. But yes, a lot of effort is, all right, think about and understand what you're trying to do before you do it.
Intentionality. It's one of my biggest things I talk to my team about. It's like, listen, whether you think you're doing it or not, if you're not explicitly doing some of these things, you're doing that implicitly and in a way that you can't get data from, you can't improve, you can't introspect into even. And so getting it external oftentimes can really help, at least help show a team where you're spending your time and where those fixed costs are that are slowing down release cycles.
So let me ask you a question, Rob. So
yeah.
I don't code every day. In fact, I usually once a quarter I get into something. When I code, I typically I'll comment it out and I'll say, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I break it down in the code as comments. Do you do that too?
Personally, not too much, but that's kind of what I will call a design realistically. Yeah. Is that kind of idea. So usually when I get in there, I'll put a little bit of comments on what I want a certain unit to do. But as far as the high level stuff, I would expect to do that externally, to say like, listen, this is what I was asked. This is the things that my software or my unit cares about. Like, this part of the system is secure, ultra secure, and it's a government thing and blah, blah, blah. So I have security is number one, right? Okay, so I got to have that at the forefront of my mind. And then, obviously a description of kind of what I decided to do and the trade-offs that I see with what I'm trying to do, right? Like, to me, just having that up front, and then when I get into the code, some comments to explain what each piece is doing to make sure I'm actually doing the things I said I would do. But that's usually how I would approach it and how I want my teams to approach it.
And so where do you put the design?
So that really depends on if teams have good places for it. Nowadays, people use Notion a lot for things like that, or they'll use their own whatever software service that they were doing. Back in the day, we used Microsoft SharePoint on a big team that I did this a lot on. We had an internal SharePoint instance because we were working in a secure space. So,
okay, just curious.
Yeah. But I mean, the point is it just needs to be a process that works for your team, and it documented and trained and honed, and that
and somewhat common.
Yeah, exactly right.
So that everybody can see it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, listen, yes, we have arrived at the end of our conversation here. I mean, wish we could just keep going for a long time, but for people that want to keep this conversation going, or, want to ask you questions, things like that, connect with you online, can you let people know where they can find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place to reach out to me. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. And we'll put that link in the description so everybody can just click it right through. But that's going to be it for us today. Thank you so much, Josh, for being our guest. Thanks to each of you for listening. We hope to see you all next time. As we close out, we'd just like to thank our sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that, hey, sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get really messy, as we just talked about today. This is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. Thanks, everybody. See you all next time.